Life after the service can feel loud even when the room is quiet. Your head replays old scenes. Sometimes you try to forget them, try to push them down, and you reach for anything that helps you feel a little bit less alone. For a lot of us, that something is music. With the headphones on, the world just shuts off, and you hope that the right song will hold you together for one more night. Now, imagine being able to point to a specific song and say, that one got me through this period of my life. This other one got me through a deployment. This one got me through a divorce. This one got me from stepping off that edge. This is a clear way of how far you can come and how much you have survived by being able to kind of replay some of these songs in your head. Today, in this episode, you're going to hear from someone who actually did stuff just like that. Army National Guard officer and author Tony Kessel built a playlist of his life. He wrote out the stories behind 366 songs and turned years of bottled up emotion, suicidal thoughts, and spiritual questions into a book and in his home studio. We talk about how music can be a crutch that keeps you stuck and how it can also be a tool that helps you finally face what you've been running from. We get into non-combat deployments that still twist you up, thinking that maybe you should have done more, coming home almost overnight, suicide intervention training, and why simply just sitting there with someone in their worst moment matters more than the perfect advice that you might want to give. Before we get into this conversation, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. It's a foundation that is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, the families, the individuals who are involved with the Global War on Terrorism and honor their sacrifices and service. If you'd like to learn more about the memorial, visit gwatmemorialfoundation.org. Now, let's get into today's episode. Hey, Tony, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Want to wish you a happy Veterans Day as well. So thank you for your service.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. It's and likewise, for the listeners who are hearing this and it's when we record these episodes sometimes a little bit in advance. So it was Veterans Day yesterday when at the time of the recording. So it's really awesome. Getting it. We were talking before the recording here, but it's really awesome getting to chat with other veterans on this show. I feel really privileged to be able to do that and just hear the stories and be first off be trusted to be able to hear other veteran stories and kind of creating a place where people feel comfortable enough to come on and share some of their the highs and lows of their lives and stuff. And
Yep.
so it's really a great opportunity here and hopefully for some of the listeners they take away some valuable feedback and hopefully get some hope out of your story here and all the others that we've had. So let's jump into your story a little bit. You spent years immersed in music, listening
Yeah.
to tons and tons of music. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, between music and the military and all that kind of stuff. Just let's get a little background on who you are.
Okay. Yeah. They're oddly enough, you would think that they're intertwined. They are, but they're not. But as far as military, I've been in the National Guard for 22 years now. I currently am in the New Mexico Army National Guard. Originally enlisted in 2004 in North Dakota as a 12 Bravo or a combat engineer. And then had a little bit of college, so I did the traditional state OCS program and ended up picking up my commission as an engineer officer. And so, really, a lot of my experience in the Army has been in the engineer realm. Culminated really in 2020 is when I left the engineer regiment and branched logistics for upward mobility. So I got to close out my engineer portion or the engineer portion of my career by being a company commander of an engineer construction company, and then promoted to major, and now I'm a logistics officer, basically working at a regional training institute. So not really logistics based. I'm more of an operations kind of guy. That's where I've hung out when I haven't been in leadership. But yeah, it's absolutely love everything that I am, everything that I've become. Um, on the professional side, I would basically say is largely contributed to being around soldiers, leading soldiers. And just as a side note, I come from a long line of NCOs, and so my I was legally adopted. My father was a Vietnam vet. My adoptive father was a Vietnam vet, and I was it was almost like a betrayal when when I jumped over to the officer side. He he's like, "There's only one. It's your cousin Buttons, and that guy. He's been different than the rest of us, you know." So yeah, he's that's kind of a large part of my military career is being raised by an NCO and now being an officer and having that appreciation for what the non-commissioned officer corps does and making sure that you're not stepping on what they do, valuing their opinion, soliciting feedback, but also having the courage to jump forward and make a decision ultimately when the crap hits the fan, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I do. I mean, like, what would my dad want me to do as an officer? Which I think is by far one of the strongest guiding things that has led to my success in the military is being an NCO minded officer. Music, a little bit different. I We can't really separate our service from music. Like a lot of the things that we do has music around it. You know, army bands and marching drums and the national anthem. You know, all that stuff. But my whole life I've been processing through music, through various song lyrics, and as going through the military, those song lyrics change, and the meaning has always been that impactful. So being with a fellow veteran, it's those songs like American Soldier by Toby Keith when you're sitting in a place and you're about to graduate and you're like, man, I feel this now. That's the way
Right.
I experience every piece of music. So when you have those intense moments, um, if I were to tell somebody what my experience with music is, it's really that. Every song that I interact with, every song that I listen to is that deep. So my journey, just in case you're wondering, it's one of the big questions. I grew up a Garth Brooks fan, like that's all I listened to. And then when he retired in 2000, I went on to other country, 90s country is some of the best stuff out there. My dad was like into old country, Conway Twitty,
Sure.
Johnny Cash, kind of losing my train of thought. Dan Seals, all those guys, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, all that stuff. Well, my foster mom was from Detroit, so I grew up on the other half of like R&B, Celine Dion, Michael Jackson, like all this deep stuff that was basically out of the Motown scene. Well, when he retired, I went on to the country, and then I dabbled around in pop a little bit, and then I went into like radio rock, your Matchbox 20, Fuel, Goo Goo Dolls, stuff like that. And
Sure.
then I took a hard turn into like heavy metal. So I listened to Creed, and then after Creed, I got into like Slipknot, Korn, Mudvayne, Marilyn Manson, all that stuff, and then just kind of took off from there. So
So you're like
really,
all over the board as far as music goes. Like
yeah,
there's not really too much that you're not dabbling into at
yeah,
some point, right?
yeah. It's
Yeah.
like I don't appreciate current rap. Like there's some of the older stuff that has really significant meaning towards like overcoming and adapting all that stuff where rappers were insanely skilled with rhyming words like your Eminems today. Some of that stuff now is I'm like, what are you even talking about? There's not even really a struggle. So that's a little bit more.
Sure.
It's difficult, and then stadium country stuff like that. But I I'll
Gotcha.
listen
Yeah.
to it and I appreciate everything. So
Yeah. So music obviously has played a big piece in your life. And tell us like so you wrote it's all in the lyrics, right? And I want
yep,
to kind of get into that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of what that's all about and how that kind of fits into this whole story here.
yeah. So and I'll show you. So this is the physical copy. It's all in the lyrics. How music helped me heal and find my voice. It's got all of the stories from me joining the army, some basic training stuff. I went on a mobilization in 2011, flood tours. Like my military career is a large part of who I am, and you can't separate that from your story. And so a lot of those things in there. I led worship on a deployment for contemporary Christian service. So it's like it's a lot of different things that are out there, and that's really where I started becoming a better musician is because I had nothing but time sitting around playing guitar. But yeah, so I honestly haven't shared this story anywhere else, and I'll tell you the origin story. But when I joined the army, Three Doors Down, Citizen Soldier, I'm in the guard, was recruiters were handing that song out, like a download code card. And so I jokingly say that's the reason I joined the army is because I love music so much that Three Doors Down, I was like, I got to get that song. And it wasn't on a CD yet. And so when I was in the recruiter's office, I was like, can I get one of those download codes? He's like, oh, yeah, man. That's all you want. I got a $6,000 bonus and a download for Citizen Soldier. But yeah, that's why I
They'll get
joined.
you any way they can, won't they?
They will. They will. And 22 years later, still love the song. But yeah, so really, it's all in the lyrics. Came about 2017. Garth Brooks was in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I was at drill, and again, a lot of people don't understand this song. One weekend a month, I lived in Las Cruces, but I drilled in Roswell. So I was at drill, and the concert was in Las Cruces. It's 180 miles, 3 hours away. I got in my car after Final Formation, drove all the way to Las Cruces, saw Garth Brooks's late show, got back into my car, and drove all the way back to Roswell. I was back at like 3 in the morning, reported back to First Formation. I was like 30, so I hadn't done that in a long time. But like as being a Garth Brooks fan, you heard it, how far I got away from him. As I was driving to this concert, I had my iPod on and I was just listening to all these Garth Brooks songs. And my childhood is just like being relived and replayed in my mind. And I was like, what in the world? How did you live all of this life? All the things that I thought were absolutely like not capable of being like overcome as a child, the intensity of emotion. I'm like, man, I never dreamt any of my life would pan out the way that it did. So after the concert, I get back in my car and I put my iPod on shuffle and basically relive the rest of the experience and, flashbacks of, graduating from high school and joining the army and becoming a father. And like every song had a story. And I just felt all of this emotion. Basically, by the time I pulled into Roswell, I was like, man, I got to build a playlist of my life. Like, I need to build a soundtrack and I need to tell these stories. And that's what I did. And so 366 songs, one song per day for a year, I blogged just as a kind of way, like a healing journey to be like, retrace your steps and see exactly how far you've come. And at the end of that, I didn't mean to write a book. I didn't. I was just like, hey, I just want to get some of this out. But at the end of it, I was like, there's so much stuff. I pulled it back out, started editing it, and I was like, this is crazy. People really need to hear this story. So that's kind of where it all came from.
Yeah, I've often been, maybe driving in the car or at the gym or whatever, and a song will come on, and it could even be a song that I've heard hundreds of times before,
Yeah.
and it just will come on, and for some reason, I don't know, maybe I just wasn't listening to the lyrics really well before, but all of a sudden it just like clicks with me, like this has some meaning to something that maybe that's going on right now, or something that happened years ago that I'm kind of thinking through in my head or whatever, that I'm just trying to process whatever, and the song just has some meaning. It may not even be the intended meaning of the song, but just has personal meaning to me, and I just can't stop listening to the song after that. It's like I
Yeah.
want to just keep listening to it over and over again and see if was there something else in that song that I missed? Like, what else am I missing here? And then I wanna listen to other songs too, because maybe there's something else I missed in one of those other songs, and I would just wanna find more and more of this, and I gotta imagine when you have 366 different songs that you're going through, like, it's probably a similar process when you're hearing these songs, and just that meaning and impactfulness comes through to you, and it's like I want to scream this from the rooftops and tell everyone about this, because maybe somebody else is sitting there just hearing the music but not actually listening to it and understanding it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it
Yeah,
was, I think that's the thing is I've had such an intense relationship with music that I basically live my life through the lyrics of songs. And there were times, and I mean, you can relate, there were times when you're going through something and that song feels like the only thing that you're clinging to from a mental health perspective. So
sure.
For me, I've used it as a drug my entire life, as a way to like medicate and try to understand exactly where I am in my position in the world, and what I can do to get past this moment. I'm making it sound really dark. I mean, I just told you I joined the army for a download code. So there are like a lot of lighter moments.
Sure.
But I think that's power. And especially in the military, like five finger death punches, wrong side of heaven, right side of hell. It's like there's this camaraderie when you see that music video. And I'm telling you, I have to be careful when I watch it because I'll break down in tears every time. Is when I hope I'm not spoiling this music video for anyone. If I am, watch it. But there's a guy who got saved by a special forces dude, and then later on, the special forces guy's on the street, and the guy who got saved sees him, and he goes up there, and the guy's freaking out because he's on the guard, PTSD type stuff, and he grabs him, and the guy's kind of freaking out, and he looks him right in the eye, and he's like, "You saved my life." I like almost bust every time. But
Yeah.
there's that meaning and that camaraderie in military individuals. It's like you can run into somebody, and the connection between like you and I is automatic. Like the comfort of being in the presence of the 1% of people who have served in the United States military is you can't explain that to civilians. And so, not to alienate any civilians who may listen to the podcast, but it's such this deep, just intense, almost the same way that I experience music. So
Sure.
really big
Sure.
deal.
Yeah, so all of these stories that you talk about, all these songs, I should say, that you talk about in the book, you're you're kind of pulling together kind of that sounds like the meaning from each of these songs and kind of how it's impacting you. And do you get into kind of like your own personal life in terms of like how it, like what was going on at the time that you're listening to the song, and how did that help you through certain situations, whether it was a dark time or a uplifting time, or something like that? What were some of the kind of stories or things like that kind of have seeped their way into the book?
Yeah, and so I try not to be that on the nose, and that was one of the harder parts of writing the book is, like here's a song and this song means this because of this. Like I try not to be that specific. Like the song title is there, and then I talk about what I went through, and I,
Mm,
I just leave it at that. So I've been through a lot. I grew up in a foster home. I was legally adopted as a child. You got the fear of abandonment. You got all those mental health issues that you're just kind of sifting through. And so song by song, I'm kind of journeying through that, like what I felt in those, not necessarily what I felt, but what I was going through and experiencing in those moments. I was a troubled child. So my dad being an army vet, as I was troubled, he would use tactics and techniques that he gained from his very extensive military career to reform me. And I guess that's probably why I joined the military. But, so like the story I'll tell you because I'm striking up curiosity. I was in trouble. And so I mowed the lawn and I went to go get the weed eater. And my dad's like, nope, you're in trouble. You got time. He handed, he handed me a pair of scissors. And so when I went around our lawn, it took me so long. I think I moved 5 tons of landscaping rock in my backyard. Like I said, troubled child.
it,
So I'm telling these stories about like what I'm learning and all of that. And like I said, when you graduate from high school, you have these conundrums of identity and trying to figure that out. It's all of that stuff to
mhm.
joining the army. And if you connect the dots, you're like, oh, okay, I see this discipline thing brought him sense of meaning, purpose, joining the military. Um, it I try to connect everything in that way, and all along the while or the way, I'm basically trying to find out who am I, like what is the purpose of life, like what why is all this stuff happening to me, and what do I do with this story now that I've lived it, or these little moments as I've overcome it. So a lot of mental health stuff because I've had it, but yeah, it's a lot of that. And like I said, instead of just being on the nose, be like, I listened to the song and I was sad and then I felt better. Like I try to stay out of the emotions and let people determine their own relationship with music or whatever art form they appreciate.
Yeah, and I think for everybody listening to a song, especially because that's kind of the topic that we're kind of covering here, but
Mm,
as I listen to a song, if we're both listening to the same song at the same time right now, I'm gonna probably take away something a little bit different than you are. So for you to kind of write down, "Hey, this is how you should feel about this particular song," it's like that's kind of bullshit. Like
Yeah,
nobody's
exactly.
gonna feel the same exact way. I mean, you might get the same kind of emotion coming from a particular song. Like you were mentioning that Five Finger Death Punch song, and I've heard it. I've seen the video that you were talking about, and I think some people like as you're watching that video, you might actually see yourself in that video as one of
Yeah,
those people in the video. Maybe not because you've actually gone through it, but you could see the path that maybe could get you there. I know I could. Couple wrong decisions, and I'm that guy. I'm that guy who's sitting there on the street and you know going through hell basically. And yeah, so of course it's going to be a little bit emotional to see that kind of thing. And and I think the video adds another dimension to the songs than just listening to the song itself, because then you get that visual aspect. You can kind of see what the artist was intending while you're watching that video as well. And so it can become quite emotional. You even mentioned another song, that the Toby Keith American Soldier song earlier. And that song in particular, I was actually at a Toby Keith concert years ago, and I was there with my brother. He was also Army, and he wasn't a big country fan. He was just going kind of to, I think his girlfriend at the time was going too, and he was just kind of going to hang out and have a good time and everything. And he heard the song, and I think it was probably the first time he ever heard the song was at the concert, and
yeah,
he just like broke down. He was crying like in the theater where we were watching the concert, and it's like it's super powerful. And I think kind of the takeaway really for the listeners here is that you know everyone goes through stuff at some point. Good, bad things happen all the time. And, sometimes music has this kind of healing quality to it where you can use that to help you get through something. And, kind of like what we had been talking about earlier, that y- you might be able to, I mean, it's not going to be replace a therapist necessarily. If that's what you need, then you need that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, it might just be able to kind of get you through that tough time. That's why they have love songs and they have all these other
yeah,
and the songs that are out there, right? And it like helps people get through the various things that are going on in their lives. And and I think mental health especially, I think the way music impacts us just can really benefit us in certain ways, if we allow it to. So if you're just passively listening to a song, it may not have the same effect, but if you're actually listening with some sort of intention, it might actually do some good for you as well, right?
yeah. And that was kind of the conclusion I drew at the end of the book. Is I talk about this mental health. I grew up in a foster home, so I was in years of therapy, 8 to 10 years of childhood talk therapy and play therapy and all that stuff. And I was still using music as the drug to process this stuff. And really, it came to a head is I was post deployment. It was a non-combat to Kuwait deployment. I came back and just you store all your emotions for a year. You go through things and you come back and I just had my first child, and so there's a lot of resentment towards like I grew up in a foster home and I was kind of doing the same thing to my son
Mm,
unintentionally. And so you come back off a deployment and you know all these mismanaged or packed away emotions, and you're trying to come to grips with them. And like you said with Five Finger Death Punch, like I was inches away. I believe I disassociated basically so much emotion that I was numb and almost had like an out of body third party experience. I was just watching myself like navigate through life. And I applied for a job to be a veterans admissions rep, helping vets use VA benefits at a tech vocational school. And so I'm walking around with vets who had been into combat that are dealing with survivor's guilt and telling stories about I had to pull this trigger on the guy. Did I make the right decision? Like these deep things. And I just got off this non-combat deployment, and I'm like, man, you have no right to feel this way, and I that is wrong. You have every right to feel that way, but that's what I thought. And so like getting
sure.
in therapy and all that stuff really wasn't in I didn't feel like it was necessary. Or when I did see a therapist, they were like, "Oh, you just need to sit through this. It's going to be good. I don't ever need to see you again." And so I kept medicating through music, and it works temporarily. It's like, pounding 4 beers one night, like it'll make you forget that you have an issue in that moment, but it won't help you address what it is that you're still carrying. And that
Right.
was kind of one of my things as I was going through this right before, I went to this concert. I was like, man, you can't use music to run away from your problems. Like, you actually have to face them for real. You need to feel these things for real and move past it. And I say that like it's so easy. It's not. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of conversation. It takes, you know, good good buddies, therapists, medication if you need it. Like, it takes so much, and it takes a community. Sometimes a community that you may not be willing to trust. Specifically in our circle, again, like civilians, it's not that we don't trust them. It's like, well, can you even relate to our track?
Right.
And that
Right.
that's difficult, you know.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely difficult, and I know a lot of folks who go to a civilian therapist and think to themselves like, What is this person even doing? What How could they possibly help me?" And
Yeah,
you know, yeah, sure, they may not have had the same experiences, but quite frankly, nobody's had the same exact experiences that you've had. I mean, yeah, sure, I've been to combat. Somebody else might have been to combat, and so okay, maybe we get that aspect of it, and but it's not that those other people are completely incapable of ever having any sort of useful information that they could provide to you. Like,
yeah,
they still do have their place where they can help you out in a way. But one of the things that you mentioned is that you do have to face your problems too. Music isn't going to completely heal you and fix everything. It can provide a temporary benefit where for in that moment maybe you're not worried about the world outside, and you're just kind of focused on that song or whatever. And I look at it kind of like a crutch. Like, if you were to break your leg and you get a cast on, and you're walking on crutches, like, yeah, that you're not going to be walking on crutches forever. It's just the thing that you need to get through that particular moment in time, that period of time that you have a broken leg. And
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you need it for a period of time, and then you won't after a bit, and you allow yourself to process through things, and it maybe just kind of takes the edge off a little bit, maybe makes it so that you can clear your head a bit and then focus on the thing that you need to be focused on, the thing that you need to be working on yourself, and not be in a thousand different places in your head, and it might just clear some of those cobwebs that are that are going on out there, and it might just help you out a little bit. So that I think is kind of like the key piece of it, and I'm glad you brought that up, because yeah, you absolutely have to go through the the emotions and the pain sometimes, and the stuff that absolutely sucks while you're going through it, but afterwards you look back on it, and it's like, man, I can't believe I got through all of that, and look at me now, and I feel like the strongest guy in the world sometimes, like, because I was able to do all those hard things, and yeah, even the strongest people, whether it's physically or mentally or whatever, they're going to need some help at some point. Even look at physical health. You got a guy at the gym, you know, on occasion they're going to need a spotter, and
yeah,
so there's nothing wrong with that. It's like they're pushing themselves. They're pushing themselves to a limit, and with your mental health, you may have been pushed. You may not want to necessarily get there, but things happen, and you may be pushed to your limits, and on occasion you might need some help. So that's where stuff like this kind of fits in to kind of help take that edge off, and make it just that little bit easier for you to kind of push through, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate that what you said about physical health is, I've as I've gone through my own mental health journey, I went to a VA counselor who was a civilian and was fantastic. But a lot of the people that I leaned on were fellow veterans. However,
Yeah.
it was as I got better, I was like, how do I use this? So suicide intervention, you being an Army guy, ACE assist, getting into like mental health coaching, and even one step further, mental or master resiliency training, is getting further and further away from suicide and suicidal ideation to the source of like, how do we build resilient soldiers in a way that they're able to face the things that we know we're going to push them into. And I
Mhm.
appreciate the military stance on understanding that your mind is it's a health, it's a health outcome, that your mind has the ability to be sick as well. So just in the same way that if you did sprain an ankle or break a leg, you'd have to see a doctor. The same thing, that paradigm and that stigma is shifting towards, hey, your mind. As a matter of fact, our mind as members of the military or soldiers is our greatest asset. So like taking care of that and putting us in a place where we actually are able to be strong in very difficult situations. Life and death is in the balance as we're making decisions, and keeping yourself sharp and getting any type of assistance to maintain careers is critical. It's so critical. So thanks for
Yeah,
saying that and acknowledging that.
yeah, no, absolutely, and it's actually kind of interesting because when you look at some some of the top elite soldiers or Navy SEALs or Rangers and whatever the top elite, that whatever you have it pictured in your mind as that top level of military. I'll just use soldier as a generic term right now, but I know I'm gonna catch some crap from the Marines and the sailors and the everything else. But when you're looking at that top level elite soldier, you're looking at probably thinking of people who are in top peak physical health. They're strong as can be. They can run, they can lift, they can do all the things physically, and they are built like machines is kind of probably the picture that a lot of people have. But to your point, if their mind isn't right, then none of the other stuff really matters.
Right.
You got to be able to take control of your mind too, so that way you can make good decisions, so you can use that power, that strength, that endurance that you have built up over time, which, don't get me wrong, all that stuff is super important as well. But if your mind isn't directing it in a good positive direction, then I mean, what good is the rest of it if you're maybe even moving in the wrong direction with, with the physical stuff? It kind of isn't very helpful. So having the strength to say, hey, you know what, my mind's not right, I got to go do something to get it right. And again, whether that's talking to a therapist or whatever it is that you might need, go get it done, because otherwise you're not as strong as you think you are. You're it might actually be hurting other folks who might be relying on you to be mentally tough as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, so
So
I think everyone gets the image David Ogden, like he's everyone's superhero. It's restraint and knowing that you're lethal. When we talk about fighting forces, knowing how lethal you are, but knowing exactly when and where to apply that force. Because I'm
yeah,
guard, so 50% of my career is still showing restraint, but in a loving way, saving your neighbors, pulling them out of floods, just moments of clarity in chaos, but for a completely different reason. And it
sure.
all it all equals the same thing in the end. Even when we're, weapons of fury, in the end, we're pushing for a peace. And I tell my veteran brothers and sisters, nobody prays for peace more than somebody who serves in the military.
Right.
But that is always the end game goal. But that the mental clarity and discipline is what makes the American service member, or I'll say soldier again, more deadly than all the rest. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I think that's the largest part of what we're starting to understand. Take for example, and I went through this, and I was talking to one of my buddies post deployment who had all kinds of stuff, and I was like, man, I'm weak. Like, what in the world? And he was like, hey, man, tell me about your coming back experience. I was like, well, I was in Kuwait one day, and then I got into a plane, and 24 hours later, I was sitting at Fort Bliss. And he's like, you know how they used to? He's like, who's the toughest generation? He's all being, Socratic with me. He's like, hey, who would you say the toughest generation is? I'm like, duh, World War II. He's like, how do you think they came back? And I was like, I don't know. I don't think about it. They're just better than us. He's like, no, no, man. Like, they sat in the belly of a ship for a month with their buddies, and they got to tell the stories. And through that, that is where the strength came from. And he's like, and we just take soldiers and like, yeah. uh, you said you've deployed. Have you ever been to Ali Al Salim in Kuwait?
Yeah. Yeah.
LSA. It is
Mhm.
the most desolate place, and I talk about it in my book. It is one of the
Yeah.
worst places I've ever been in my life. I call it hell's waiting room because you're sitting there, and I was
That's
I was
basically
coming,
right.
yeah, I was coming back from Kuwait, and I got into an argument with a warrant officer because I was wearing ACUs, he was wearing OCPs and or multicams at the time. He's like, "Oh, it must be nice." I'm like, "I didn't pick where I'm serving, man. Like, I got a call, I answered the call, and I'm here. Like,
Yeah,
don't
right.
criticize. Like, you as a chief warrant officer have a responsibility to be a little bit more professional than that. So I'm lecturing. It's on a bus. Like E4s are hearing us talk about this, and he's like, "No, no, you're right, man." Like he quickly reformed to my guidance or my correction, if you will. We
Yeah.
don't pick where we serve, and so you're in this melting pot of different experiences where like dudes carrying weapons with 1,000 yard stare that were in combat yesterday, and now they're at LSA and they're like, I'm safe. Like, and then us, and we're engaging with these people, and you're like, what am I doing with my career right now? Again, wrestling with those very dialogues that I had with that warrant officer, and it's just like you don't have we didn't have that time in the GWAT era to process what it was that we just felt yesterday. Time changes, all of the stuff that we had to go through, and now all of a sudden you get back into America, you're separated from your buddies who had that exact experience. You don't have that camaraderie of, hey, do you remember when so and so did such and such? He's such an idiot. Like those stories
Right.
we have to tell, and those things we have to just kind of ruminate in to be okay to go into normal society. And I think that was such a powerful lesson that he taught me, and no other person that I could have talked to could have shared that, but somebody who went on GWAT deployments that understands 1 week at Fort Bliss and then total separation from your buddies and back to your family. Maybe that's not always the way. Maybe that isn't the way to resilience. You'll find it
Right.
or you'll have to, but that that dynamic between a World War II soldier or service member and us is a big difference.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, when you're going through there, you're home in no time, in a blink of an eye, in comparison to those World War II soldiers who would be on those ships for weeks at a time
Yeah,
and really have nothing other to do than to sit there and shoot the shit with everybody else and swap war stories and things like that, and you get to talk about it and process it with those guys. And there's no internet back then where you could just hop on Facebook and start chatting with other people or anything like that. So if whoever you're going to talk to, they're sitting right there, they're probably in the bunk right next to you, or they're in that same general vicinity, and you just got to decompress in kind of a safe area where you don't have to worry about bullets flying over your head, and you can just sit there and let it all out if you need to. And you know I know for me, I was one of those guys who by the time I got there, I had been in combat the day before, and
yeah,
it was like this is a complete night and day difference. And I was home the next day, like
yeah,
home, like at my house the next day. And it was like, my God, what a
yeah,
difference from literally not knowing what was going to happen one day to, a day and a half, 2 days later, I'm in my own bed and
yeah.
like safe and don't have to worry about anything more than anyone else has to worry about, here in the States. Like, generally, you can go walk outside and you're not worried about someone coming up and blowing
Yeah.
you up or shooting you or like that, for the most part. Like, you're pretty safe here. But my God, like, what a difference. And, sometimes it's hard to just turn that off.
Yeah.
And when you get here that quickly, it, I mean, I didn't have it turned off. I was still head on a swivel, and I was looking out for things all over the place, when I first got back, and it's hard. It was hard to turn that off and learn that it's okay. But when you're sitting on a ship for a few weeks, you know, you kind of learn, hey,
Yeah.
this is safe. I'm with the people who kept me safe, and
Yeah.
I can be okay here. And maybe by the time you get home, you learn to turn some of that off, and so you can get back into the world and into society, and not be, you know, that that guy from the Five Finger Death Punch video that you were talking
Yeah.
about, and just you know
Yeah.
constantly on alert.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
insane to believe that you were like 2 days, and I heard those stories, and you could feel it. I saw this E4 just walking. He had a weapon and 1,000 yard stare, and he didn't look well. So I approached him. I was the first lieutenant at the time, and I walked up to him. I was like, "Hey, man, you okay?" And he, like, at that point in time, he's like, "Oh crap, I'm face to face with an officer." So, like, I was like, "No, no, no, I don't want your salute, man. Like, are you okay?" And he's like, "Ah." He couldn't explain it, but I was like, "I know exactly." As a non-combat
yeah,
guy, I was like, "I know exactly what's running through your head right now," and that's he didn't have to vocalize that. It was not the same shared lived experience, but it was something. And it's hard to imagine that that guy was having to make a decision as to whether to pull the trigger of a weapon to end somebody's life 24 hours ago, to 24 hours later to be like, "What kind of ice cream do you want?" Like, how
right,
trivial those two decisions are in balance. And then you're
yeah,
you're like, "Okay." I don't know if you heard of
yeah,
comedian Pete Holmes, but he's like, we have to walk around and talk about, like, balance of life and death, and just pretend like we're normal, and be like, I'm not thinking about this while I'm trying to place my ice cream order. And again, it's just that dynamic of even just being in a non-combat situation when you've grown up in America your whole life and you're in a third world foreign country, and now you're like, man, like the things that we take for granted as, like, in America, like, I didn't have a cell phone. And I'm like, why do we have this thing? Why are we tethered to this device that just, like, the concept of homelessness amongst veterans rang crystal clear. I was like, why do we own so much stuff? Everything I own fits in a freaking duffel bag. I have 6 hooded sweatshirts, a couple army uniforms, a laptop computer, and a notebook, and a couple other things. Like, why do we have all this crap? Like, you start to really ponder what life is like, and you know it's awesome. I'm not downing what life in America is like, but you're like, man, all this
sure,
excess, like, do we really even appreciate what we've obtained through the freedoms that we have? And that those ponders or those questions is just so difficult to come back and be like, oh yeah, yeah, totally. This is what we're gonna do now. It's a hard
right.
corner to turn.
Yeah, I mean, the way I have described Afghanistan was it reminded me of what I would imagine biblical times were,
Yeah,
with the addition of cars, cell phones, and AK-47s, and that's pretty much, you add those in, it's basically biblical times, and
yeah,
the way they live, the way they dress, even, it just seems to me like that it would be very much similar to way back then, 2000 some odd years ago. Like really not much has changed over there. And I know it's an overly simplistic view of things, but when you look at it, it's like they're living life, and they don't need all that stuff that we have. And yeah, sure, don't get me wrong, I love the stuff that we have,
yeah,
the comforts of home, and the things that we have. But there are so many people, and it opened up my eyes to this, that so many people around the world who don't have any of that, or not
yeah,
even a fraction of what we have. And I mean, for them, they're happy. I've actually talked to a guy who is from Afghanistan, came to the United States, and he said he hates it here because
yeah,
he's working constantly, trying to just to afford basic things, and he's just he can't live on the type of money that he would make back home in
Yeah.
Afghanistan, but he doesn't wanna go back there either because he doesn't wanna get killed, and so
Yeah.
he's kinda, like, stuck between, the 2 things, and he's I guess he's just choosing the lesser of the evils, but, it's
Yeah.
just a different culture, different mindset, different way of life, but, when you come back from a place like that, it is easy to kinda get turned off by some of the excess stuff that we all enjoy here,
Yeah.
to some extent anyways. I mean, we may not all enjoy, social media and Facebook and
Yeah.
the cell
Yeah.
phones and all the other crap that we have, but, we all enjoy the convenience and things that they bring, so going forward, what's next for you? What's coming up, kinda down the road, and more music, another book, anything else that you might have kinda in the works?
Yeah, so writing this book with these musical aspirations, I basically determined, and I've been a dude trying to find a band. Some of my mental health issues as I went to college was like, I wanted to be a rock star. I joined the army, but I wanted to be a rock star, and I was like, man, if only I had a stage, then I'd be happy. The pursuit of happiness ultimately consumed me, and then I joined the army and a bunch of other things, and things kind of took a different turn. But really, as I wrote this book, it kind of really awakened, like, hey man, these musical aspirations. I'm sitting in my home studio now. This is not an awesome shift to be like the excesses of American society, and now I'm sitting in like a studio with like thousands of dollars of equipment. But yeah, ultimately, that's what I determined is my life story has impact enough to write it in a book, but also artistically I have so many songs, and this little thing back here, I have 20 years of lyrics that I've been in a hurry up and wait. I've been sitting in a thing, and I'd write it down in an army notebook or whatever. I'm like, wow, that's genius. I'm gonna write it down, and then just like copying it over to pages. Really, what it comes down to is just having the courage to put these feelings, regifting society the exact thing that I was given as a consumer to be like,
Mhm.
hey man, maybe when I was younger, I went through bouts of suicidal ideation at that time, and I was afraid. I was like, man, what happens if I write something that pushes somebody to the edge of where I was because I was irresponsible in consuming music to the point where I got to this point. I don't want to be responsible for that. And that petrified me for 3 to 5 years. And so now I'm at a place where I'm like, I'm not responsible for how people consume my story. In the book, I talk heavily about suicide attempts, and I had three in a 48-hour period. And there was a part of me that was terrified. One, to write that out, and people like they're gonna think I'm crazy. Like why I actually teetered. That's not acceptable. People have been to combat. You start comparing, and there was a part of me that's like, man, if I put this out, and I don't go into graphic detail, but I do describe it. I was like, that's kind of irresponsible. And as I was editing the book, I was like, do I really want to put this out? What happens if you cause somebody to tip? I was like,
Mm,
it would be irresponsible to not tell people that there's a chance for help. It would be irresponsible for me to live this life and to have these skill sets and these talents artistically and creatively and not use them, specifically in the veterans community. Because as I've stepped out in courage, I started, it was a suicide intervention training that really awakened that I was like, you got to start telling people about your suicide attempts. And it was a ace assist. There was this chaplain, and I was like, it's the chaplain talking about how he coached these people through suicide, and whatever. He's a captain. I was a captain at the time, and he's like, as he's going through the video, you're just like, that's his role in this. He's like, I'm the spiritual guy that helps you get through that. Well, at the end of the video, he admitted to suicide attempts, and I was like, if this guy's willing to risk his entire military career, his job is to talk you off the ledge when you get to that place, and he got there, and he's on a video largely publicized by the United States Army as get help. I need to do something with this story, and that's
right.
really what I feel now. This isn't I the desire to be a rock star. Like if I became famous, I'd be awesome. But like my desire is to link the community and to start to get people to understand that, I thought I was the only person who grew up in a foster home. I didn't know a lot of other people who did, but I thought that. I thought I was the only person that was legally adopted. I thought I was the only person who had suicidal ideation, who had a fear of abandonment. I thought I was the only one who went on a non-combat deployment, had to leave a child behind, and had these emotions. I was like, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm the only one. But as I heard from that chaplain, I was like, maybe I should tell my story. And every time I do open up, I always have somebody pull me aside and be like, "Hey, man, I just want you to know, me too. Like, I can't say
Mm.
this publicly yet, and I have to encourage them. If you're not in that place, don't." But I get so many people coming up to me and saying, "Yeah, that's the way I felt. This is where I was," and that in itself is why I desire to write and record music, to put out creative projects, is so that other people that pick this up, if it changed one person, if it opened up somebody's mind, if it made somebody feel the way that those songs made me feel as a child, I would be irresponsible as a veteran, as a soldier, a current acting serving soldier, as a human being, to not share that gift with someone, to make
Yeah.
them understand that you're not alone in these things. And maybe I don't need to understand exactly where it is that you are. But the biggest thing is that you don't have to be alone in that. And that's
Right.
power. Because a lot of times we're afraid. They're like, what happens if I say the wrong thing? You don't need to say anything. They just need to talk. And you just need to sit there in that
Hmm.
filth with them and let them know, like, no man, I can't relate, but I'm here. I will not walk away
Right.
until you're comfortable. Obviously, if it's a suicide intervention, you got to get them to a place. But like sitting in those
Sure.
moments with someone is huge, is huge. And that's been kind of my plea or my honor, is because you don't always know how to reach out to a person, but I do know how to turn the dial on a stereo and be like, yeah, Ivan Moody, I see and feel what you see and feel. Even a non-military veteran, like, I feel that. Thanks for seeing us. So
Yeah, absolutely. And partially as you're talking there, partially I'm kind of reminded of why I started this show. Even is because of several friends that I served with who took their life after coming back home, and to me, I was like, one was too many, and then whatever is going on is just too much, and I wanted to do something to give people the hope, the strength to keep moving on and not be in that place. And hopefully they hear a story, hear a message from somebody, whether it's from me or for one of my guests or whatever on the show. And hopefully that's the thing that, if it helps one person, then great. And hopefully it helps more people than that. But ultimately I do this show hoping that there comes a day that I don't need to do this show, because
yeah,
I hope that everybody just gets, all the help that they need and all the hope and encouragement and all the things, and we don't have to worry about this. And the veteran suicides go down to zero, and we don't have to worry about it. I know that's a ways off in the future, but that's my goal. That's my hope, is that I don't have to do this, because everybody has found their way of getting that hope and getting that peace and everything like that. And so, and this is your way of kind of giving it back to the military and the veteran communities. And I think it's wonderful. And I think everyone, will benefit from that, in one way or another. And I definitely appreciate everything that you're doing. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story and everything that you're doing. And I will have all the links to the book and all your stuff in the show notes as well, so folks can check it out and grab a copy and go from there. So thanks again for everything that you do.
I appreciate it. Thank you.